There's a thing nobody tells you about nursing. You learn to read a room before you walk into it. The smell first, antiseptic underneath something sweeter, which is never good. Then the monitors, the particular cadence of alarms versus silence. Then the quality of light leaking under the door, whether it's the steady blue of the overhead or the warmer, dimmer glow that means someone's turned the lights down, which usually means family is in there doing something final. After 12 years on nights, I could tell you, just from standing in the hallway, whether someone was turning the corner or sliding toward the end. I trusted that instinct without question. Until room 412 and a woman named Miriam, I had never once been wrong. Miriam came to us in late October, which is already a hard time on any floor, but especially ours. Something about the turning of the season makes people let go. I've noticed it for years, and I've stopped trying to explain it. She was 73, admitted for a bowel obstruction that bloomed into sepsis while she was still in the ER, which turned into respiratory failure by the time she reached us. By day 2, she was on a vent, sedated, and her daughter Claire had taken an indefinite leave from a job in Cincinnati to sleep in the recliner by her mother's bed. Claire was one of those people who processes grief through competence. She kept a notebook. She asked precise questions and wrote down the answers. She wanted to understand every number on every monitor, and to her credit, she got good at it quickly. She could tell me when the pressure waveform looked different without me prompting her. But every morning, without fail, before she asked a single clinical question, she would look at me and say, "Is she still fighting?" And I would say yes, because it was true, and because there's a particular kind of cruelty in taking that sentence away from someone before you absolutely have to. 3 weeks in, Miriam started to stabilize. Not dramatically, not the kind of turn you see in movies, but the slow, grinding, almost grudging kind that means a body is genuinely deciding to stay. The numbers crept in the right direction. We reduced her sedation, talked about extubation trials. I let myself feel cautiously hopeful, which is the specific flavor of hope you learn in the ICU, held at arm's length, always qualified, never spoken aloud because the floor has a long memory, and you don't want to be the nurse who celebrated too soon. That's when I first saw the woman in the chair by the window. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I've told the story enough times that parts of it have started to feel performed, and I'm trying to stay close to what I actually saw. She was old, maybe late 70s, white hair pinned up neatly, wearing a pale blue cardigan over what looked like a hospital gown. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, perfectly upright, and she was looking at Miriam. Not at the monitors, not at the door. At Miriam, with the steady, patient attention of someone who has been waiting a long time and has made their peace with it. My first thought, genuinely, was that a patient had wandered in from another room. It happens. Confusion, especially at night, especially with the elderly. So I stepped back to the nurse's station and checked the log. No visitor had signed in for 4 hours. Claire was down the hall at the vending machine. I'd passed her on my way. I went back to room 412 to ask the woman if she'd gotten confused, if she needed help finding her room. The chair was empty. The room held only Miriam and the vent in the monitors and the low sound of the HVAC and nothing else. I stood there for probably 30 seconds longer than I needed to. Then I charted my assessment, poured cold coffee down the sink, and told myself I was exhausted. Which I was. I'm always exhausted on nights. That part wasn't a lie. She was there the next night, too. Same chair, same posture, same pale blue cardigan, which I noticed this time had small pearl buttons and a worn patch at the left elbow. The kind of detail you don't invent. I came in fast. No preamble, you approach a confused patient before they have time to get agitated. She looked up at me, and I want to be precise here. She did not look startled. She did not look guilty or confused or like someone who had been caught somewhere they shouldn't be. She looked the way a person looks when you've interrupted them mid-task, mildly inconvenienced, mildly patient, waiting for you to finish so they can get back to what matters. And then she was simply gone. Not gone like she stood and walked out. Gone the way a thought goes when someone calls your name mid-sentence. There and then not there, with no transition between. I checked the chair. I know how that sounds. I checked it anyway. The seat cushion was warm. I told Bev, my charge nurse, the next morning before handoff. Bev has 26 years in that unit. She has seen codes and miracles and everything in between, and she approaches all of it with the same level expression, which is one of the reasons I trust her completely. She didn't laugh. She didn't look surprised. She said, "Describe her." And I did, the cardigan, the hair, the pearl buttons, the worn elbow. Bev was quiet for a moment, and then she went to her locker and came back with a photograph. A staff retirement party from 15 years back, a long table, balloons, everyone in scrubs or street clothes, and in the back row, half turned toward the camera, a small woman in a pale blue cardigan. Her name was Edna. She'd worked our unit for 31 years as a staff nurse, never went into management, never wanted to. She knew every family by name, remembered which patients liked the blinds up in the morning and which wanted them left. When she retired, the floor threw her a party that went 3 hours over. 4 years later, she was admitted to the same unit as a patient. Cardiac complications, fast and bad, and she died in room 412. In the bed where Miriam was lying right now, Bev said, "She shows up when someone is close, just sits with them. Nobody knows why that room, maybe because it was hers." I wanted to argue. I'm a nurse. I believe in creatinine levels and chest x-rays and evidence-based protocols, and I had spent 12 years keeping a clean line between the clinical and the inexplicable. But Bev said it so flatly, the way she'd say the charge defibrillator is in Bay 3, just a fact of the unit that needed to be passed on, and I didn't have anything to put against it. Miriam crashed that night. A pulmonary embolism, bilateral, which we hadn't caught because nothing in her presentation had pointed toward it. Her pressure dropped in 11 minutes. We coded her for 40. At 4:22 a.m., the attending called it, and I stood at the foot of her bed for a moment before I did anything else, before I started the post-mortem paperwork and the phone calls and all the machinery of death that follows. I just stood there. The room was very quiet. The monitors had been silenced one by one. I looked at the chair by the window, and it was empty, and I was grateful for that, in a way I still can't fully explain. Claire was in the family waiting room at the end of the hall. I was the one who walked down to tell her. I'd done it dozens of times, you never stopped dreading it, and she was sitting very still when I came in, her notebook closed in her lap. She looked up at me, and she already knew. I don't know how, she just knew. She nodded once, slowly, and said, "Okay." And then, was she alone? And I said no, because she wasn't. I've thought about Edna a lot since then, about what it means that she chose to stay, if choosing is even the right word. Whether what she's doing is a mercy or a vigil or something we don't have language for yet. I think about whether she sat with me, at some point in 12 years, when I was the one who needed it. After the bad codes, the children, the nights that hollowed me out, and whether I was simply too tired or too afraid to look at the right chair at the right moment. What I know is this. Room 412 has never felt the same to me. I still do me job in there. I assess and document and advocate and care. But when I walk in on nights now, I always glance at the chair by the window first. Not out of fear, out of something closer to respect. The way you'd know that a colleague who's been there longer than you, who knows things about this place that you're still learning, who just wants the patient to have someone in the room at the end, who never stopped caring, even after. Hello, and thank you for being here. We want you to know that Bone Chilling Nightmare is completely free from ads. No interruptions, no distractions, just pure immersive storytelling. But creating these experiences comes at a cost. Every video is built from hours of research, writing, and production, all done with care to bring you stories that truly stay with you. Without ad revenue, the channel depends entirely on the support of viewers like you. If our stories have ever captured your imagination or given you that unforgettable chill, we invite you to support us. Whether it's $3 or $500, your contribution directly helps us continue creating and growing this community. Don't just watch from the shadows. Be part of what keeps Bone Chilling Nightmare alive. Thank you so much for checking out the link in the video description below to support and keep this creepy community thriving. Thank you again for your support. People ask me sometimes how I do this job. Pediatric oncology. They mean it kindly, but there's always an undertone of something else. Pity, or horror, or a kind of awe that I'm never sure I deserve. I never know what to say. The honest answer is that the children make it possible. Not despite what they're going through, but because of how they go through it, with a directness that adults lose somewhere along the way, a refusal to perform. They are exactly who they are, right up until the end, and if you can bear to witness that without looking away, it changes you. It changed me. Marcus changed me most of all. His full name was Marcus Adeyemi. 9 years old, born in Lagos, raised in Toronto, moved to our city when he was 6. Medulloblastoma, third recurrence, which means his family had already been through 2 rounds of this, 2 surgeries, 2 stretches of radiation and chemo, 2 periods of watching their son lose his hair and his appetite and his stamina, and then get them back and start being a child again, only to find out it had returned. By the 3rd time, his parents, Dina and Kofi, had a quality of exhaustion that wasn't like ordinary tiredness. It was structural. It had become part of how they moved through the world. Dina braided and unbraided her hair at his bedside. It became her thing, hours of it, her fingers working automatically while she watched him sleep, or talked to Kofi in low tones, or stared at the window. Kofi read to him, novels mostly, books. Marcus was technically too young for, but had requested anyway. He was a kid who wanted the real thing, always. When Kofi got too tired to read, he'd play the audiobook through his phone, and they'd listen together, Marcus with his eyes half open, Kofi with his head tip-tip back against the wall, both of them somewhere else for a little while. Marcus called me Nurse Reboot. I'd had to restart his IV pump 3 times in one shift early on. A bad line, user error on my part, nothing dramatic, and he had found this unreasonably funny. He named me on the spot and it stuck. Every morning when I came in, Nurse Reboot, don't touch my pump. And I would say I made no promises, and he would look at his mother and say, she's gonna touch the pump. And Dina would actually laugh, which I want you to understand what that meant. What it took. A child who could make his exhausted mother laughing that room in those circumstances every single morning. He had a tablet loaded almost entirely with animal videos. The capybara eating watermelon was the centerpiece. He had watched it, at a conservative estimate, somewhere over 200 times. But he also had a red panda playing with a pumpkin, a sea otter cracking a clam against its chest, a pygmy hedgehog attempting to climb a stapler. These were serious curatorial choices, and he would explain them to you if you gave him the opening. He required you to watch with him as a condition of receiving morning medications. This was non-negotiable. He had established the policy early and held the line on it firmly. I have sat in the edge of his bed and watched a capybara eat watermelon more times than I have sat through any movie. I don't mind. I never minded. About 2 weeks before he died, he started talking to someone who wasn't there, or wasn't there to us. He'd be in the middle of something, a video, a snack, a quiet moment, and he'd look up at the corner of the room near the window and say something, wait, nod, occasionally laugh. Not the confused mumbling of a delirious child, full, clear, directed speech. The meds were steady, his fever had broken days ago, neurologically, nothing had changed. He was simply talking to the corner. Dina saw it and didn't ask him about it. Kofi saw it and didn't ask. I understood why. There are questions that feel like they might break something if you say them out loud, and I think they were both living in that careful way, avoiding pressure on the glass. I asked him. It was a Tuesday, quiet morning. He'd just finished the capybara video and was in a good mood, that particular loosened-up, chatty mood that came after a good night and a video he loved. I was flushing his linea, and I said, as casually as I could manage, "Hey, who've you been talking to over there?" and nodded toward the corner. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look like I'd caught him at something. He looked at me the way he did when I asked about the hedgehog video, like the answer was completely obvious, and he was mildly surprised I needed it explained. "My grandpa Eddie," he said. "He comes mostly in the afternoons, but sometimes in the morning if it's quiet." Eddie, his grandfather, had died 2 years before Marcus's diagnosis. I knew this because Dina had mentioned it once during a long night when we were both exhausted and just talking. She'd said she was grateful Eddie didn't see Marcus get sick, and also devastated that he wasn't there, that Marcus didn't have him. She held both those things at once, with the weary expertise of someone who's learned that grief doesn't resolve into one clean feeling. It just sits in you in multiple pieces. I asked Marcus what his grandpa said to him. He thought about it the way he did when I asked him to explain why the hedgehog in the stapler was funny, genuinely considering how much of his interior logic he could translate into words for someone slower. He says it's going to be okay, Marcus said. Then he paused. But not like when grown-ups say it. He looked at me steadily. Like, actually. I held that. I didn't say anything useful in return. I finished the flush, capped the line, told him the capybara was unquestionably his spirit animal, and left the room. In the hallway, I put my back against the wall and stood there for a minute. Just needed to be still for a minute. What I kept returning to, what I still return to, is the distinction he made. Not like when grown-ups say it. He had cataloged, at 9 years old and in full possession of his faculties, the difference between their assurance people offer because they can't bear the alternative and something he was receiving from a dead man in the corner of his room that he experienced as categorically different, as true, whatever that means. I have spent 7 years trying to work out what that means. He died on a Wednesday at 3:47 in the morning. Both his parents were with him. They had barely left the room in his last 4 days, and the outgoing nurse, Maya, told me it was peaceful. His breathing changed, slowed, and then stopped, and there was nothing sharp about it. That was how she described it, nothing sharp. Maya pulled me aside before I even clocked in that morning. I could tell from her face before she spoke. She told me what had happened, and then she said there was something else. Around midnight, she had gone in to do her checks, and Marcus woke up, not groggily, not from pain, but clearly, the way a person wakes when they mean to. He looked at her and asked, in a completely normal voice, if she could do something for him. She said yes. He said, "Can you tell Nurse Reboot goodbye? Just her." And then he settled back against the pillow and closed his eyes. And that was the last coherent thing he said, not his parents, not the other nurses who'd cared for him. Me, by name. Specifically. A child who was dying asked for a specific goodbye to be delivered to a specific person, almost 4 hours before he died, in the middle of the night when that person was asleep at home with no idea. I don't know what to make of that. I've turned it over for years, and I still don't know. Whether he understood something about time and sequence that the living don't have access to. Whether Grandpa Eddie was in that corner telling him, gently, what the morning would bring. Whether a dying child simply feels the shape of things ahead the way you feel weather in an old injury, not seeing it, just knowing. What I know is that he wasn't afraid. I've seen fear in patients of every age, and Marcus didn't have it, not in those last weeks. He had something else, a settled quality, like a person who's received news they were dreading and found it more manageable than expected. Like someone had sat with him in the afternoon and explained things, carefully, and he'd listened, and it was okay. Actually okay. His word. I still watch the capybara video. I put it on when I need to remember who I'm doing this for. It sounds ridiculous to say that a 4-minute clip of a large South American rodent eating fruit is what keeps me tethered to this job. But here we are. It's not really about the video. It's about being the kind of nurse who would sit on the edge of a bed and let a 9-year-old teach her what mattered. It's about honoring the transaction. He gave me that, and I carry it, and maybe that's what a goodbye is for. Not the ending, the carrying. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I truly appreciate your time and presence, and thank you for your support and contributions. It means more than you know and helps keep Bone-Chilling Nightmare alive and growing. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story.